Let's say you're a PM at Airbnb. How would you increase bookings? Hey everyone, welcome back to another Exponent Product Manager mock interview. My name's Kevin Wei, and on today's show we have Phil. Phil's going to be going through a strategy question today. And before we go into that, Phil, do you mind just telling the audience a little bit about who you are?
Yeah, well, hey everyone, my name's Phil. I'm currently a product manager at Google working on Android Messages, which is, for those of you who don't have an Android, the pre-installed texting app on almost every Android device. And I'm the PM responsible for the actual conversation experience. So ultimately, the team tries to answer what does it really mean for you to feel, connected to the people you're talking to, and what sort of experiences can we build to deliver that. Before that, I started my career at Google on the YouTube ads team, where I got to build YouTube TV's advertising platform. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Thanks for having me on today, Kevin. Really excited to do this with you.
Absolutely, and thanks for your time to come on the show. So, like I mentioned, we're doing a product strategy question for today's mock. So, this is a question I like to ask for today's mock. Let's say you're a PM at Airbnb. How would you increase bookings?
How would I increase bookings for Airbnb? Uh, I have some thoughts, but just to make sure we're kind of making the right assumptions and discussing this at the right level of altitude, can I ask you some clarifying questions?
Of course.
Yeah. So I do want to understand, I think, my role in this scenario a little bit. So do I own a specific part of the Airbnb experience, or can I assume that I'm setting a sort of holistic strategy that can impact multiple services on Airbnb?
Yeah, let's say that you have free reign to impact any service you want.
Got it. And did you have a specific segment of users in mind or a market, or is that also up for me to decide?
Yeah, that's a good clarifying question. I'd say it's up to you. And if you pick a specific segment, maybe you can let me know how you'd prioritize that.
Yeah, awesome. And then this is interesting because you mentioned like top line bookings. And so interesting if we should think about, should we increase bookings by attracting new users, or are we trying to increase the frequency of bookings for existing users? Also happy to decide, but want to see if you had a point of view.
Yeah, I don't have a specific point that I want to go towards. So either new or existing users, whichever one you think gets us the most ROI.
Okay. Um, and then yeah, any other constraints I should be aware of, or free reign on that as well?
Yeah, I'd love to hear like any number of ideas you have, but maybe we can keep the timeline at like a 2-year horizon.
Okay, that sounds good. So to make sure I think I structure kind of our conversation properly, mind give me a moment so I could kind of think through what the right structure and framework is?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so let me do, I think, a little bit of signposting on how I think I'm going to try to work through this problem. Essentially, I think it's 4 steps. So I think step number one, let's just start by defining, I think, what success looks like. So yes, obviously, you could say success is increasing bookings, but there's a million possible ways we could move this metric. You can imagine we could spam customers with notifications. We could lower prices on listings in an unsustainable way, but all these tactics are value destructive. But I do like starting with the defining what success looks like, because it forces us to identify what problem we're trying to solve for our customers, and whether we're uniquely aligned with Airbnb's overall mission. So step two, let's segment those users and identify their pain points and prioritize them. Step three, I think we'd love to do some brainstorming. What are some hypotheses we have for how we get us to this good outcome? And then step four is, let's talk about what problem do we prioritize solving? What's our solution? And if we have time at the end, we'd love to talk to you about what data we look at to verify that we're doing the right things. I'll pause there. How does this approach sound to you? Anything you'd like to add, or any additional details?
Yeah, this approach sounds good. Let's get into it.
Yeah. All right. So step number one, which I think I have written here, is defining success. So to define what a good outcome is, let's think about what problem Airbnb is uniquely positioned to solve for its customers. In my mind, I think the unique value Airbnb provides is that it's the best possible way to experience travel that's, I think, unique and authentic to the destination you're going to. So if you think about their history a little bit, started with, crashing on someone's couch on people's homes. And yes, that was a cheaper alternative than staying at, some faceless hotel chain, but they did a really great job of framing that experience in a way where you got to like really immerse yourself in the culture and the lifestyle of that community. And this is a bit of a ramble, but I think I mentioned that early because I think as we start brainstorming pain points and solutions, it'd be good for us to keep in mind that original ethos and mission statement. So let me write that down really quick just so I don't lose my train of thought. And specifically, the mission is, we want users to experience travel authentically. So back to our good outcome, beyond, I think our good outcome beyond just like moving this bookings metric, I think what we really want to accomplish is that whenever someone wants to travel, hopefully Airbnb is more frequently the service that's top of mind for them because they know that it's the best possible service to experience this unique and authentic experience. But it's kind of cool, right? Like in a way, we've sort of reframed the question. We're not just increasing bookings in absolute terms. What we're really trying to do is, people are traveling probably only like 3 or 4 times a year, maybe. And what we really want to do is of those 3 or 4 times, let's make sure Airbnb is the service that's top of mind for them because of the unique experiences we provide. So I think if we had to define a North Star metric, it's essentially, I think, increasing annual bookings per user per year. And that's really kind of like our indicator of whether or not Airbnb is sort of offering the best possible experience. I'll pause it. Does that logic sort of track with you?
Yeah, that makes sense. If you were to kind of break that down into maybe like a specific formula, would there be something that you would be looking at? Like maybe optimizing for quantity of nights or something else?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question about what we define as a booking, right? So yeah, maybe we could dig into it. In my mind, initially, it was just bookings as like one unit, irrespective of how long it was. But to your point, yeah, there are reasons to kind of track nights stayed on Airbnb. So I'll rephrase actually. I like that. Our North Star should really be in a given year, how many nights is someone staying on Airbnb? That's a good point. Appreciate you for pointing that out.
Cool.
Yeah. And I'll mention too, because this aligns with kind of our North Star metric. The important thing to keep in mind is that, like, I think travel is seasonal and has natural plateaus. So hypothetically, if someone is booking 3 or 4 times a year, staying at Airbnb like 10 to 14 times a year max, it's probably not realistic for us to assume that we're going to make such drastic of a change where they're suddenly staying 30, 40, 100 nights a year. So let's keep that in mind as well. With that, I think we could talk about, I think, customers and their pain points. That sound good to you?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Might give me a minute to think about this. I kind of want to think through what the right segmentation is.
Cool.
Yeah. So if it's all right with you, Kevin, I think for the sake of time, just to add some guardrails here, I'll focus primarily on guests for now. Airbnb, two-sided marketplace, but I want to focus on the guest experience, if that's all right with you. But obviously, like, whatever we do for the guests, we should be mindful that, like, whatever recommendations we provide doesn't obviously impact the host side. Does that sound good to you before I talk about segmentation?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of different ways we could segment. But I think I gravitated towards sort of these 2 dimensions. We could talk about this dimension of business travel versus leisure travel, where leisure travel is just someone booking a trip for fun, and business travel is you booking a trip for work, sometimes through your employer who have partnerships with hotel chains, etc. And then the second intent is someone that's a high intent traveler versus a low intent traveler. And I think what I mean by high intent is that this is someone that's at this very moment looking to actively book travel right now. Whereas low intent traveler is someone that's used Airbnb before, but probably not traveling isn't super top of mind for them. They probably don't even have the Airbnb app kind of downloaded on their phone at this very moment.
Got it. And just to clarify a little bit, so this is high intent to travel, not high intent to use Airbnb when they travel.
Yeah, high intent to travel. Yeah, high
Got it.
intent to travel in general. Yeah, and I'll note too, I think we could have segmented on a lot of different dimensions. We could have done solo versus group travel. Probably could have segmented by like age, who have different travel expectations, like millennials versus Gen Z, boomers, etc. But I think I gravitated towards this because, like, I think without any data in front of me, just have some intuition. But I think the calculus would be a little different, like, had a data science team and things like that. So with that said, I think the next thing we should talk about is probably which segment should we kind of target and prioritize and why. And when I was kind of going through this, my intuition tells me that we should rule out business travelers, I think, for the following reasons. I think, yes, they're a new kind of target market. It could be really exciting, but there are also the sort of travelers who I don't think value the sort of authenticity and uniqueness that Airbnb provides, going back to kind of our unique core value. They value convenience, and they're probably better served by, I think, hotel chains that their companies might already have existing relationships with. And I think it's also it'd be a pretty risky bet strategically for Airbnb to onboard a totally new type of supply just to cater to this new demographic. So I think it makes sense for us to stick with, I think, Airbnb's original market, which is leisure. But now the debate is high intent people actively looking to travel and book right now versus low intent, which is not really thinking about travel, etc.
Yeah, that makes sense to kind of think more about the leisure side. I can definitely imagine for business side, a lot of these people are already set on, hey, I want to earn my status or my points through these hotel chains. I want to get room service, and it's going to be really hard to change the behavior of hosts who, majority of them are probably very hands off when it comes to booking between check-in and check-out. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's definitely focus on the leisure.
Yeah. And then now I'm debating between, I think, high intent versus low intent. Thinking about high intent a little bit, let's go through their pain points. So if I'm a high intent traveler, I already have a set date. I likely already have a destination. And right now I'm really just looking for listings and experiences. And I think they're considering things like best price, location, etc. And I think a lot of resolving those pain points will likely involve, reducing price of listings, improving supply, improving discovery, or really just like reducing any sort of friction along that user journey of finding a place to actually purchasing. Which I think these are kind of things that Airbnb is like already kind of actively invested in. And I would say that, for these high intent users, that user journey can start on like Google or Kayak or Expedia. And really, if you look at all those three things I've listed, or those four things I've listed, which is price, supply, discovery, and reducing friction on that journey, the only one that I think Airbnb has a unique advantage in is the kind of supply of local/authentic listings. Now, with that said, as I was thinking, I think the interesting opportunity for us to at least explore is the actual low intent travelers, which is these are the folks who right now aren't actively planning their next trip. But at some point, these low intent travelers become high intent travelers. And we talked about our good outcome of making Airbnb more top of mind. I think the question can be framed then as, what pain points can we solve for the low intent travelers currently so that when it does come for them to travel, Airbnb is sort of the top of mind choice for them, which is sort of interesting. But anything you'd like to add before I kind of think through my recommendation?
Yeah, I think this is definitely like, there's merit to breaking down the segmentation in high intent to travel versus low intent to travel. I think one question I have is just wouldn't there have to be a lot of macro events to for someone to convert from low intent to high intent? Maybe they have to earn more salary, or COVID has to go away. Is there some other way for us to target a user segment where we have more control over?
As in, there are a lot of different factors that could influence whether or not someone has the intent to travel.
Right. Let's say we have some strategy that targets all these people who have no intention to travel, but we think they're gonna become people with intention to travel in the future. I feel like there's a lot of macroeconomic things that would have to happen in order for some of these low intent people to become high intent travelers. And if these things don't happen, then all of these investments would go to waste.
Yeah, I agree with that. Which is why I think I was a little reluctant to go with low intent, but I actually arrived at, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit in terms of solution, but it's
Hmm.
I don't think our strategy is to all of a sudden turn a low intent traveler into a high intent traveler. Like you said, there's a lot of things that go into that. It's a very gradual process. But I think what was interesting for me was right now, Airbnb is very much this ad hoc tool that you only go to when you want to search and when you want to kind of book travel. What's kind of interesting is, in terms of like a strategy that I wanted to explore a little bit, was can we sort of change the interaction model with Airbnb, where instead of just being an ad hoc tool, it's more of a destination, maybe a place you can learn more about kind of different areas, maybe a place where you find travel inspiration. Give them a reason to come that's not just booking travel, so that when it comes time to travel, um, Airbnb is sort of the brand that's more top of mind. That's sort of what I'm thinking. I would like to go down that route, but if you think this is totally bananas, I'm happy to kind of step back and consider something else.
Yeah, maybe it'll be helpful for me to understand like what's an example of a low intent traveler, maybe like a persona.
Yeah, I guess it'd be someone like me where I guess like I would imagine, let's think of this, where probably a bunch of New Year's resolutions this year to travel more. I know someone like me made that sort of New Year's resolution, but I know for someone like me, I don't really know where to start. And I don't necessarily want the kind of generic itinerary of going to like Paris to seeing the Eiffel Tower. Not to disparage people who want to do that. I would love to do that personally, but sort of harking back to the original kind of good outcome, which is why would I use Airbnb? It's like it's a place I can have a really unique and awesome trip. That's not just your cookie cutter hotel chain. Okay, where do I start? And can I find inspiration for that? That's not just Googling a bunch of million different blogs. And then can I find that at the site that I'm ultimately going to book? Um, that was something that kind of got me excited. But
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I guess like we're thinking about someone who doesn't actively make plans, maybe 1 or 2 years out for like, hey, like I already know this year I'm gonna go here, or next year I already know I'm gonna go there. They're probably a little hands off when it comes to, or more passive when it comes to travel planning. And we want to see how we can convert them into being active Airbnb users so that we can improve or increase the number of nights booked, right?
yeah, and granted, it sounds like a risky strategy, right? Because essentially, what you're doing is you're essentially turning Airbnb a little bit into like a content company.
Hmm.
Um, but happy to kind of talk through my logic of, I think naturally, like with any sort of strategy question, right, we would want to have an MVP, have a hypothesis, dip our toe in it first before let's just shove 50 engineers in here and build it. Happy to talk through how I would approach that, but yeah, how would you like to guide this
Sure.
conversation?
Yeah. I think now that we're on the same page about what the low intent traveler is and why we think this is a good place to make a bet, I'd love to hear where you would go from here.
Yeah, and so this is one of those things where I think we should just be very crisp about what our hypothesis is and how we test it before we kind of make any really big investments. Um, and so I think here's sort of what I'm thinking. I think the premise of this entire strategy is predicated on a belief that if people visit Airbnb more frequently just to browse or do whatever sort of activity, then when it does come time for them to travel, they'll book with us more often. And that's probably data Airbnb has already. I think that's the sort of analysis I would do first, which is specifically for users who visit Airbnb, X number of times, how does that correlate with them booking with Airbnb, Y weeks later? And do we see a positive correlation there? Because I think once we have that as a foundation, then the question turns more into strategy and product, which is, okay, what services can we provide to bring people to Airbnb? Does that logic track for you?
Yeah, totally.
So I have three options, I think, in mind. And I'll name them now, and then we'll talk about how we could think about prioritizing them. I think one is to kind of redesign the listings page to kind of feature the hosts and their stories more. So, Airbnb already has this feature where they designate super hosts. And I'm curious if highlighting personal stories or differentiate their listings more can, not only attract more bookings, but give people a reason to come, like almost like read a blog. And, and then obviously people will come visit Airbnb more top of mind when they want to travel. The second one involves sort of social and user generated content. I think this is where we could prompt people after they visit to post photos of the really great trip they had. Full disclosure, not a big fan of this one. I think there could be one, I think it's a tall ask to ask people to kind of post photos and things on another service besides the one they're using. And I think it gets a little bit into like unhealthy FOMO aspects that kind of distracts from Airbnb's sort of original ethos. The third one I thought of was actually making their like add to wish list experience richer and more personalized and more useful. You can imagine something that's sort of like a Pinterest experience that's tailored towards travel destinations and activities. Those are kind of like three high level directions, and I think they're pretty substantial investments, but I'll talk about which one I think I want to tackle, and then we could talk about the MVP of that one for which direction. And essentially, I think my rough prioritization framework is essentially of the options we have, what's the expected impact towards getting us to our good outcome, as well as like what's the expected cost of delivering this outcome. I think for the sake of this conversation, I'm actually pretty fired up about the third option, which is expanding the wishlist experience. And here's my reasoning. What's nice about the wishlist experience is that one, that experience already exists, that functionality already exists, and we're just extending it. But two, it's a non-dominant sort of user journey, which I think gives us a lot more flexibility to experiment with different experiences without massively disrupting users. And granted, like I mentioned earlier, building like a Pinterest-like experience is a pretty heavy strategic investment. You're retooling the entire wishlist experience, but we should talk about, I think, a little more scoped down MVP of how we would build this, I think.
So would this be how would this be different than the social user generated one? Because when I'm hearing like, oh, it's like Pinterest, does it kind of have like the same feed, or what's the vision here?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I should have clarified. The Pinterest wouldn't be sort of like a generic, it wouldn't be user generated content. It'd sort of be restructuring how you could interact with kind of the listings page. So right now it's sort of static pages that show you something, but it's like changing the UI in a way where you could show, just make browsing, I think really the strategy is just make Airbnb more indexed towards like a browsing experience rather than a high intent search experience, I guess. So did that make sense? I feel like if it's not clear how I'm painting the picture, please let me know.
Yeah, so maybe you could walk me through what this user experience would look like. Like if I'm a user and I come to the website, what do I see?
Yeah, I think when you come to the website, instead of just offering you the ability to search, we call it the wish list experience. And so you would still have the high intent, like plan your booking travel here, but off the side, you'd have oh, would you like to explore? And when you hit the explore, you have like a sort of different experience that's like, I would imagine like much more immersive. You could scroll through kind of like beautiful listings and destinations. In my head, it kind of looks like a inspo page almost, to really kind of play up the like, this is, you have one part of the app, which is the core app, which is like, this is where you book. And then one part of the app, which is this is where you kind of can browse and explore and find inspiration for your next trip.
Got
And
it.
all
Cool.
the wish list and tooling involved with that. Yeah, thank you for having me clarify.
Yeah, yeah, makes a lot of sense there. So, yeah, I mean, I think this sounds interesting, and I'm wondering maybe in the few minutes we have remaining, do you have any sort of launch strategy that you would keep in mind when you're placing this huge bet?
Yeah, I would not just launch a this like right away. I think we'd have to scope it down a little more. Um, I think the one I'd have in mind too is like we could have some way of highlighting that there is like a different explore experience. When actually no, I think fundamentally we want to introduce users to the fact that we are going to invest in an exploration experience. So actually, this seems counterintuitive, but I think I would actually send out a newsletter to inactive users highlighting here are some of the unique experiences we have on Airbnb. And that's kind of nice because I think most of the engineering work would actually be setting up the logging and tweaking some of Airbnb's email outreach infrastructure. We have the marketing team generate some content. And I don't think the content needs to be personalized to each user necessarily either. But it should highlight like, here are some really cool experiences that's unique to Airbnb. And I think our success metric is how often are people clicking on this newsletter? Like, is the prospect of exploring more listings and proactive suggestion of exploring more listings attractive and appealing? And then from there, once they click on the listing, we could actually monitor like, how do users navigate around Airbnb after they click on it? When they click on it and you show the listing, do they then search for related trips and experiences? I think then maybe that gives us some signal on, oh, maybe proactive suggestions is a good investment. Does the newsletter prompt them to kind of favorite that listing and add to their wish list? Then it's, oh, maybe we should invest a little more in the wish list experience. So to summarize, I think my recommendation would be start small with a newsletter that goes out to existing users. See how engagement with that newsletter drives engagement with Airbnb. See how engagement with Airbnb leads to an increase in kind of nights stayed per user per year, which is our North Star metric. And then understand how users behave after they tap this newsletter and arrive at the Airbnb page. And that could give a signal on where to invest more in a more exploratory, browsy experience.
Yeah, it makes sense. I could definitely see how this can help people inspire some of those more passive users to explore more. Cool. I think this is good for our mock interview here. So I'll pause here and I'll dive into a little bit of feedback. And maybe at the end, you can give the viewers some advice on how they could tackle similar product strategy questions. So I really liked how you started off with defining success, and you talked about not only like this user segmentation about like high intent, low intent, business, leisure, but you also called out all these other segments that you could have segmented by, like such as age. So I thought that was really good to hear some of your other thinking and why you didn't pursue some of the other paths. I think I specifically went out of my way to try to poke holes and try to give you a lot of pushback. And I believe you handled that pretty gracefully. I think there were like 2 or 3 places where I really like pushed you, and it definitely shows that you really believe in what you're talking about. So always good to have that as a trait in an interview. Also, I think it just shows in your answer that, you know, even though you yourself, you're not a big traveler, you're able to take this travel question and add substantial color to it, and kind of put your own twist on it in the sense that, you know, like even at the end, like I could tell that, you know, this could be a nice product that people could use to kind of inspire themselves to travel. So all in all, thanks for your time for answering this product strategy question. And if you have any tips for the audience, I think that would be awesome for us to hear that right now.
Yeah, and I think for me, one, strategy questions are really hard. And if I was to be candid, like I don't know even if that is a great strategy, the one articulated. But I think the interview advice that I've received in the past that's been really helpful is they're not looking for you to be quote unquote right in the 45 minutes you have. They want to know, like, is this someone that's a principled thinker? Can they get feedback? Can I see them actually having this conversation with them as like a colleague? So I actually really appreciate your feedback, Kevin, because it was like, oh no, this does change my thinking. Oh, I didn't articulate that very well. And I think the second too was like, I know interviews are daunting, but try to have fun with it too, because this putting yourselves in the interview shoes. They have a ton of work they gotta do. They have to do 45 minutes of this. Then they have to like write up the feedback. Like, do as much as you can, be high energy, and make that 45 minutes enjoyable for them. And it's surprisingly effective. But yeah, I'm rambling. But yeah, Kevin, I had fun. I hope you had fun.
Absolutely. And I think this is really valuable for the users. So for the viewers who are watching at home, this is definitely really good advice. I think very similar to a lot of other interviews, it's not about the specific answer. It doesn't matter if the question is like design an alarm clock for the elderly or whatever. It's not the specific answer. It's more about the conversation you have with the interviewer and how you get to your approach. So yeah, good luck with your upcoming PM interview, and hope this mock interview was helpful. Thanks.
Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons below to let us know that this video is valuable for you. And of course, check out hundreds more videos just like this at tryexponent.com. Thanks for watching, and good luck on your upcoming interview.